Senator Rubio's firsthand experience. Check this out.
Until now. Just hours ago, we finally got Rubio on camera, and what he said, it is big news. Senator Rubio says Grush is not the only high-level government official to come forward with these kinds of claims. There are others, he says. Let me say that again. Grush, who you saw on our air, is not the only one to come forward, according to Rubio. Others have come forward in secret to Congress.
We'll say there are people that have come forward to share information with our committee over the last couple of years. I would imagine some of them are potentially some of the same people that perhaps he's referring to. I want to be very protective of these people. A lot of these people came to us even before these protections were in the law for whistleblowers to come forward.
Sorry, people who have had firsthand knowledge, who claim to have firsthand knowledge of seeing this type of thing?
Or have firsthand knowledge or firsthand claims of certain things. Some are public figures, and you've heard from them in the past. Others, have not shared publicly. And so we're trying to gather as much of that information as we can. And the reason why I'm being cautious, I'm not trying to be evasive, but I am trying to be protective of these people. Some of these people still work in the government. And frankly, a lot of them are very fearful of their jobs, fearful of their clearances, fearful of their career. And some, frankly, are fearful of harm coming to them.
So that category of people who have firsthand knowledge, who say they have actually seen these kinds of things, do you find many of them credible?
Well, I don't find them either not credible or credible because we have no basis. Understand some of these claims are things that are beyond sort of the realm of what any of us has ever dealt with. What I think we owe them is just a mature, understand, listening and trying to put all these pieces together and just sort of intake the information without any prejudgment or jumping to any conclusions in one direction or another. I will say I find most of these people at some point, or maybe even currently, have held very high clearances and high positions within our government. So you do ask yourself, like, what incentive would so many people with that kind of qualification, these are serious people, have to come forward and make something up?
So Brian, not exactly saying yes or no that they're credible or not credible, but he said he doesn't see a reason for many of these people to fabricate these kinds of things, and says that they are serious people. And you just heard him in high levels of the government, some of them even still working in those capacities. He did go on to say, we have to be cautious about this because we don't want to jump to any conclusion one way or another. Many of these claims, he says, are fantastical. So you just have to stick to where the facts take you. Nonetheless, I think big revelation tonight from Senator Rubio and some pretty serious information there.
Yeah, very serious information. So I don't want to spend too much time talking because I'm sure you guys have already are on to the next one here. Nick Pope, who is a former minister of defense, he was in the military apparently, or he was working for the government in a different capacity. Not the U.S. government, I don't think, but it was he has become quite a voice in this, and he says he has some inside information that at least 24 people are coming forward to the U.S. government. Check this out.
Do you think now is the moment, Nick, where we're going to see more whistleblowers come forward? I mean, it certainly seems like it's already happening based on what Senator Rubio said.
Yes, absolutely. I 100% predict that over the next few days and weeks, we'll hear the names of other individuals who have not spoken out before. There's safety in numbers, I think. People are cautious about this, but once the first few speak out, I think others come forward and say, you know what, now is the time to speak out. And you do not even get in the room with people like Rubio and the staffers without passing muster in terms of the vetting. So when the question from Joe was, are these people credible? I don't think, as you say, as I say, that you even get through the door unless they've done their vetting and found the people and the information credible.
And look, I mean, I was just thinking this through as we've been covering this story the last couple of weeks. If they're not credible, that would mean that we have people in the highest levels of the intel community in our government with the highest level of secret clearance that are either liars or have just gone crazy.
Yes, absolutely. Either way, this would be a big issue. But, you can understand maybe the vetting process fails and one or two people slip through the net. But by all accounts, I'm hearing that maybe as many as 24 people have come forward. And when when Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who heads up the Pentagon's Arrow office that has the lead on this, when he last spoke to Congress, he said people were coming forward to him too. So, I mean, it's incredible at the moment. You've got people coming to the DOD, you've got people coming to Congress, you've got people coming to the media, but all of them are telling a consistent story. You know, these rumors that have been around for decades, what they're saying is they're true.
All right, they're true. So let's see if they're true, because this is what's fascinating about this whole thing is that although what the narrative is presented as true, what is actually going on here? And this is what I know I've played this clip over and over for everybody, but I want to make sure that people understand that this is more than just a truth in our physical realm. This is a physical deception, and this is why I know this. Check this out.
And the priest told us, could I have a little bit more of your time? I want to do something very fascinating. He says the grain plane, the master's grain plane, for harvesting the nations, for harvesting the multitudes of the earth into his cause, just before the close of the great controversy between the forces of good and evil. So we continued, after we expressed ourselves that we're deeply interested to know more about the activities of the spirits. And he said it's going to be done in a unique manner. This grain plane is going to take people are going to eat the stuff, because it says spirits, demon spirits, will declare themselves to be inhabitants of far distant planets in the galaxies that are coming to warn the inhabitants of planet Earth of the impending destruction of the planet, unless something seriously proper is done to avoid
it, he says. And so this is Roger Marneau. If you've never seen this clip before, this is from a 3.5-hour video online that talks about the major deception that's going to come at the very end of time for religion. And this is a much bigger problem than our government even realizes right now. Some in the government do realize it's a spiritual problem. It's not a physical problem that we're experiencing with aliens from another planet, but a much bigger psychological problem, because that's what the whole experiment, I guess as some ufology says, is undergoing. We're not a zoo. It's it's this idea that we either love the Creator or do our own thing. Do we want to do our own thing, or do we want to follow what we know is truth? So this is the big deal. So let's jump back into this, because there's tons of more news articles coming out showing that we are in the midst of this grand deception right now. This is prophecy fulfilling, and this is why this is so important that this channel continues. Corbell, who has been quite a voice on the UFO news, talks about this a little bit, challenged by reporters, but he still comes through. Listen to this guy. This is amazing.
Well, I'm not the only Navy pilot that's come forward on this conversation.
It is undoubted that our government and our intelligence agencies have sequestered UAP or UFO technologies and have been exploiting them for derivative technologies for decades. And we're seeing multiple nations get on board and start coming forward, including Canada.
Undoubted and decades is a pretty big claim, Jeremy.
It's not a claim, it's fact. And if consensus reality needs to catch up, that's not my problem.
You say it's a fact. And you've looked into it. Can you just broaden on that?
Sure. So there was recently an admission from Canada through a letter to the Minister of Defense that talks about the Five Eyes Foreign Materials Program. This is a program that houses a UFO program, an exploitation program that they found. He was urging the Minister of Defense to get a classified briefing on it because he saw the writing on the wall that Five Eyes is involved, that their country's involved, and they don't want to lose the trust of the Canadian people. We're seeing this all around. It's like a version of the movie Don't Look Up.
So I guess what does Congress have to do next, Jeremy? If there's more voices like yours who are coming forward, what's the next step here then?
Right. So people have come forward to me and told me about their firsthand experiences with these exploitation programs. I have pushed people to Arrow. I have pushed people to the Senate Intelligence Committee. So they need to continue hearing, doing, and actuating the legislation that they have put in place to cut off the funding. That's the carrot and the stick situation. Cut off the funding for illegal UAP reverse engineering programs, but turn it back on for acknowledged ones.
Have they reached out to you? Has anyone from Congress reached out to you? I mean, you're making some.
I can't say.
You can't say, but you won't deny.
No, I'm not denying that. I think it's been well established that I've been trying to assist this process.
And so if a congressional process needs to go forward, I guess when and how is that likely the next step?
Yeah,
when are we talking?
The writing's on the wall. I mean, we're going to have public, open congressional hearings that absolutely talk about this with people with direct knowledge. And I think that's really important to earn back the trust of the American public, because this has been corrosive. The over-classification and secrecy about UFOs and what they represent to humanity, that has been corrosive to public trust. Everybody's been saying that.
I got to say, it is fascinating that Senator Marco Rubio, top Republican on the Intelligence Committee, now has come forward and openly talking about this. And as Joe talked about in the defense bill, they are talking about, quote unquote, non-Earth origin or exotic UAP material. It's out there. The conversation's happening. It's
shocking. It's not out there. It's right here. But it's shocking if you haven't heard the basics yet.
All right. We got to leave it there. We'll talk to you again, Jeremy Corbell. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yep.
Jeremy's so spicy. Every single thing that he says on the news is like challenging them. He has a beef with the news for not covering this topic well enough. And if I was on that side and understood it from his point of view, I think I would be a little frustrated too. But there's a much bigger understanding that's going on right now, and I think that's where a lot of these people are falling short. And so, if you think that it's important to get this message out, hit that little like button on our video. It really does help, and it brings more people in, and it sends the message out. The video gets out there further in YouTube. Hit that like button. I really appreciate it. All this is coming to pass because David Grush, who is a former military representative, and he has spent 3 weeks. It's been 3 weeks in the move, maybe 4 weeks now. Whereas, and no other media has really been covering this. That's what's amazing to me.
Full marks, by the way, to News Nation for giving the story the run it deserves. I think a lot of people have been waiting for Mr. Grush to be discredited, for somehow the Pentagon to come out and give a reason to disbelieve what he says. We're over 3 weeks now into this story, and they have not laid a glove on his credibility. And the reason why is because they can't. Mr. Grush is a patriot. He's a good man. He's backed by multiple corroborative witnesses, and all he wants is for his story to be heard. And I guess students of history would know that it often takes other media time to follow up a legitimate story. And that's what I think is happening here with News Nation's exclusive. I think the rest of the media are, to some degree, hoping like hell that the story fails, because that's the way the media works. But if they worked their sources, as I've been doing now for years, they would know that this is a legitimate story. This is a serious, scandalous accusation being made by a highly reputable patriot who's genuinely concerned that the American people do not know the full truth about a scandal that has been allegedly kept for over 80 years. He's alleging criminal behavior, as he told me in the interview. He believes strongly that there is suspicion to believe that people have been murdered to protect this secret. You don't get any more serious than that.
Yeah.
And I'm just gobsmacked. I have to agree with you. It amazes me that few other media, great newspapers like the New York Times, the Washington Post, have completely dropped the ball on this. And in fact, what they've done is they've run stupid little articles that have ridiculed and tried to marginalize the story, little green men references and things like that. And I don't think the public buy it anymore. I do believe strongly that Mr. Grush has raised prima facie strong evidence of a cover-up, of an enormous criminal scandal.
You make a good point. I mean, at this point, 3 weeks out, if he had any dirty laundry, someone would have dug it up by now. We did an insane amount of vetting of him before we did the initial story. You did your own vetting, so we were confident going in. But now, I just don't get it. I mean, even putting him aside, Marco Rubio going on the record, other members of Congress going on the record, the planning stages of public hearings, I just don't understand how other stories get so much coverage, and this one sort of just gets swept under the rug, something that just feels so important. It's going to be really interesting to see if other outlets pick up on it. Ross Coulthard, thank you so much for coming on.
So I think what's interesting is that the machine is working behind the scenes here to try to cover this as much as possible. Not cover as in put it on the air, but try to cover it up. And that's because that's what's worked for so long. And that's why other news organizations that are, let's call it as it is, probably controlled by a small number of people, except for News Nation. News Nation is wild. As I was looking into them a while back because they started canceling some of my programs, it was hard to find them tied down to a specific large entity news corp, and I think that's why they're covering this so big. This narrative has gone from being a very much a security issue to the nation, to the air, because they were seeing these big glowing lights in the sky that aren't physical craft. Now it's becoming, hey, we have physical craft and bodies and all this other very strange stuff. I mean, just weird. To the point where it's going to be, they're saying it's a catastrophic thing for the U.S. government unless they come out and say it. So we've gone from a security issue to a catastrophic problem unless the government releases this stuff. And so I think that's interesting. That's where we've come from. And that is emphasized in this video right here.
A public hearing with Grush. You think that's inevitable at this point, and if so, when?
Yes, there's a strong intention from both Senator Gillibrand, Senator Marco Rubio, and also in the House from Congressman Burchett and Gallagher. I suspect that there will be multiple hearings. The Congress has now got its teeth into this issue, and I guess you just have to wonder at what stage, Blake, does the president intervene? I think it's catastrophic if there's a forced disclosure here. I think the government needs to actually consider now some kind of admission, because the evidence is overwhelming. The weight of witnesses is becoming extremely strong. Does the government want this to come out in a spill inside the Congress, or does it want to present as a government that's in charge, that's able to tell the public the truth? It's as simple as that.
Ross Coulthart, great to hear from you again. Excellent reporting as always.
So there you go. They're putting pressure on the government of the United States right now. And it's not just the United States that is experiencing this. There's major governments around the world that have had the same issue. And so now we're going to go to Ben Hansen. Ben Hansen's a former FBI agent, and he's also a Hollywood personality that runs some UFO thing show on Hollywood's media channels. And he's going to give you a little bit of a short history of the presidential candidates that have looked into this. This is all mainstream news, guys. I'm not giving you some ulterior news. This is on TV, on cable, and what's being talked about right now. This is what I try to do. If I do look into the lore, I'll tell you that this is lore. This is not something that is proven. But strangely enough, I am surprised that some of the lore is becoming true. At least true physically, not true spiritually. Let's look into this. Watch this.
I want to welcome back to the program UFO investigator Ben Hansen. He is also a former FBI agent and host of the Discovery Plus program, UFO Witness. Thanks for being with us again tonight, Ben. You know, I was thinking about this today because we focus so much, obviously, on what David Grush said, and then Senator Marco Rubio responding and saying that there were other whistleblowers out there. That was really the headline for the last couple of days. But when we went over his whole interview, it's also very interesting to think about the fact that even if you put the UFOs aside, the possibility that there actually is a secret government program that even our leaders don't know about, that there's no one accountable for this program, it sort of blows your mind.
Yeah, and Brian, I think that Senator Rubio is spot on. I know it can be frustrating. He's talking about kind of running into brick walls. They've been tasked to task Arrow, the new UAP task force, to look into these things, and they're not getting the answers they want. But I think when politicians this generation get there, it's a little bit of naivete to say, that they didn't expect this, because it's not the first time. We can go all the way back to Senator Barry Goldwater, who his friend General LeMay at Wright-Patterson, he demanded that he show them that his friends show him the materials, the bodies reportedly, stored at the airbase. He was flatly denied and chased out of the airbase. We have, President Carter, who made all these campaign promises, becomes president, stops talking about it, and then of course the Clintons. Both President Clinton and Hillary, looked into this, and they still to this day imply that they were perhaps lied to. I mean, how would that be to be the president or, president-elect, you're running on a campaign, and to know that there's some sort of maybe puppeteer above you that's running the show, and not even the president of the United States has a need to know the full story of what's going on.
Yeah, like who's the boss of that person? Who's the boss of that department if it actually exists?
Well, I think the structure of how these things are done is kind of the process of how that all works, because when you're working in special access programs, a lot of times your own supervisor doesn't know what you're working on. They're not read onto the program, right? And if this has been going on for decades, it's probably parsed out not only within the government to very, very small units within different agencies, but also into the private sector. And as we know, a lot of these private contractors cannot be FOIA'd. You can't get the Freedom of Information Act stuff. And so when you're going to ask the questions, you may be talking to the wrong person. And then, Arrow themselves may not have the access they need to ask the questions. And so it's very, very difficult. And I can understand why they're demanding, but they're very frustrated they're not getting the answers.
It's just, yeah, it's fascinating and disturbing all at the same time.
Yeah, so I can understand how this would happen in the government, especially if they push it over to contractors or something like that. Contractors that don't have to answer if they say, hey, government, do you have this through a FOIA request? And everything's compartmentalized. I mean, we get stuff all the time from other nations and say, hey, what is this? Can you disassemble this? Can you tell me what it is? Think about the China balloon. And then they take a piece of it and they try to figure it out and they realize, well, that's just a weather balloon. But sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes it's something else. Or is it? So we haven't actually seen anything physical yet. So let me remind the audience that this is still show me the knob from the alien craft, and then I'm going to believe you. But it is interesting to see that, because we have seen in Scripture, I think Matthew pointed this out, that at least the first two, or 1, 2, and 4, I forget, I'll have to look it up, but it's the plagues were absolutely in Exodus were seen as duplicated by the magicians physically. And so it's not a surprise if we see something physical as a deception, especially this craft. It's be something, though. I want to remind everyone that this is the 4th of July. They say in this business, don't ever date your program, but this is the perfect time to share with your family so they're not affected by this this major deception that's coming. And might be a good program to share with them, because it has so many legitimate news articles that we're only halfway through. So definitely share this. Definitely hit that like button. Definitely subscribe, because you're not going to want to miss anything that comes out as we follow this narrative as it progresses, as we know it will. Happy 4th of July, everyone in the United States. This next one is also from, it was from Banfield. Banfield is, a show on News Nation. It's starring one of the major news anchors, and he gives a little history of Roswell. So this is fascinating to me, because throughout the lore, people have said that Roswell is, a UFO crash and all this other stuff, and it was a weather balloon. And but then David Grutch came out and he's like, well, I can't talk about Roswell, but I can talk about the 1933 craft that we stole from Italy. Apparently, the Vatican knew about this craft long before anybody else and was involved with it. Kind of surprise, not surprise, right? But Banfield says, let's look into Roswell on the legitimate news. This just gets wilder and wilder. Check this out.
One of the most famous of the alleged crashes of a UFO happened near Roswell, New Mexico. It was 1947. A rancher named W.W. Mac Brazel found unusual debris scattered across his property. That's all fact. That really happened. When it was reported to the Roswell Army Airfield, officials called the debris a flying disc. That's how it initially came out, a flying disc, but they quickly walked that back. Then eyewitnesses' claims of alien bodies being taken from the site emerged, and soon accusations of a government cover-up and conspiracy. They were rampant, with flying saucers to spy craft, to eventually they were calling all of this weather balloons. Well, tonight we have brand new details about a possible second debris field from that 1947 crash. And this is video that you're looking at it right now.
So I'm going to pause it right there because although they have
one of the most famous of the alleged,
they have brand new craft or brand new details. It's a second crash they said happened in Roswell, and it doesn't really hold a lot of water. I'll be honest with you. I'm not too sure they're going to find a lot of stuff from this, because they go in and they say, well, a lot of it's been perused on by the FBI, CIA, government officials. They keep coming back looking for stuff maybe they missed, which tells me something. But they said they haven't been able to find much there yet. But what they do is go into a little bit more detail on this what's it called? Roswell incident, and say why they think it's real. Check this out.
What I guess you could say kind of sold me on Roswell, that something happened here, was the first book that I ever read that was authored by Don here. And when I saw the number of witnesses, hundreds, both firsthand and secondhand, that came forward, I wanted to know, is there anyone still alive I could talk to? And I had the chance to interview someone who was a child at the time who handled the material. Her dad was with the fire department, brought it home. She handled it there at the kitchen table. And in a matter of time, the military police came over and actually threatened her with her life. And when she retold this story to me, she's now passed, but she was in tears, and you could see the emotion that she legitimately felt, that she thought she was going to be removed from her family and killed if she ever talked about this. So I had another witness, the son of someone, again, problem is they passed away, but they have affidavits from so many of these people whose father was part of what they call the Air War College that happened the next spring. And he was invited out to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where we know a lot of this material went. Anyways, he handled the debris from Roswell and told his sons right before he passed away that he saw bodies. And one of them actually was still alive. It was not human-like, but not human. And that they were asked to kind of weigh in on what they should do with the situation. So I think when you put all these together, it makes a really good case that why would people, even though they're passed now, on their deathbeds, make these confessions to their own children, and some of them have so much emotion and traumatized by it yet, today.
Again, the plot thickens. We're going to see a lot more physical evidence, I believe, in the future, but it doesn't deter my belief and my Christianity, because let's be honest with you. This is something that the Bible has said from the very beginning. When Jesus came down, when Jesus was here on earth, he said, and the disciples asked him, hey, how can we know it's the end? How can we know when this thing's all over? He says, the first thing he says is, don't be deceived. He was concerned about deception. And it should be obvious, because how else was this whole thing started? By deception. The snake in the tree in the Garden of Eden deceived through half-truths. And what we're seeing throughout this whole thing is a fingerprint of the devil. Half-truths being presented. In fact, what we're seeing, even a Banfield, the program we watched, I guess just now, or this is with this guy with the suit and tie in it, he says that there have been 3 credible, I'm using my finger quotes for those listening, photos, and he wants to show them to us. And I want to point out that these things never look the same. They always look like toys in the sky, at least some of them, or some kind of major CGI. Now, this is before CGI, all these photos, but I'll tell you a little bit more about this right afterward. Check this out.
I want to go through, though, because there's been so many videos and photos over the years, especially it seems like lately, a lot of it gets debunked. I want to go through sort of the top 3 photos that seem the most credible. I know the first one is from McMinnville, Oregon from 1950. Just kind of walk me through these photos and what makes them so credible in your eyes.
So a lot of people say there's just a lack of, I just heard Michael Shermer, the skeptic, say there's never it's always a friend of a friend who saw something, or the friend saw something, and it's anecdotal. But, you know, dating back to the late 40s and early 50s, case in point, McMinnville, Oregon, in 1950, two witnesses, Evelyn and her husband, Paul Trent, saw this disc-shaped object hovering over their garden, and Paul grabbed his camera and snapped off 2 or 3 really good shots. Those photographs have been analyzed to death, including part of Project Condon and Blue Book, and there was never determination that they were bogus. They were authentic, broad daylight, points of reference, multiple eyewitness photographs of what appears to be a disc.
Those look clear. I don't want to rush you, but we only have about a minute left, so I want to get to the other photos. Tell me about 1965 Santa Ana, California.
It was a highway worker by the name of Rex Heflin. He was identifying potential hazards in the road. He had a camera with him, a Polaroid camera, and he snapped off 3 or 4 shots of a disc-shaped craft. Those 2 have never been debunked. He maintained his story till his death, and they're very good broad daylight points of reference, again, photographs.
And what about 1990, the photo from Scotland?
So those photographs I heard about in the late 90s. I interviewed Nick Pope, who investigated UFOs in an official capacity for the Ministry of Defense. And I said, what were some of the best cases? And without hesitation, he went to this case that took place in Scotland. But there were 2 witnesses. They took 6 photographs. The object was hovering stationary in the sky for some period of time before a Harrier jet went round it. And then when it took off vertically at a tremendous high rate of speed, according to the witnesses. And there were 6 photographs taken. The MOD took over the investigation. The 2 witnesses wanted the case publicized, but the MOD took over, confiscated the original photographs, confiscated the original negatives, and this never saw the light of day until just recently. David Clark, seen in that photograph here, did an extensive amount of research, found this guy who was part of the RAF, Craig Lindsay, and he had kept 1 print, and that's an original print. So
interesting.
Of one of the photographs.
You almost have to wonder sometimes if the older photos are in some ways more credible because it was like before technology had advanced and you could get in your computer and Photoshop and that kind of a thing. So interesting to see those 3 photos specifically. James Fox, thank you so much for breaking it all down for us. We appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Hold on here, because just because you don't have Photoshop doesn't mean you can't manipulate a photo. Anybody that is alive in the late 70s or later, maybe even the 80s. Hey, I used film, so we did something dodge and burn. I mean, that was manipulating photos where you're making sure some parts were light, some parts were darker, and you could even transpose things on top of each other while the film was developing. So I'm not saying that just because there's not Photoshop doesn't mean it can't be Photoshopped. Wink, wink. I do believe, though, that we're going to see some major deceptions, and those things, those ones, although maybe they might be more legit, what we know is that through looking through MUFON, and Joe Jordan was the guy who brought this out, these things appear as however people think a UFO should appear. If someone thinks they should be seeing a Tic Tac in the sky, that's what they appear as, to make people think it's a UFO. If some people think it should be looking like a top hat, like that second photo, well, that's what they're going to appear as, so that they think it's a UFO. There's so many, these things appear as so many different things, but the primary thing that they look like is a big, round, glowing orb. And that's what Scripture says are angelic demons, angelic entities, period. And so what we see, and throughout the history, they've appeared as just whatever people want a UFO to look like. So that's fascinating. But we've been dealing a lot with primarily the physical aspect of this, because that's what's in the news right now. It was Tucker Carlson, when he was still on Fox, that brought out that these manifestations, these things that appear in the sky, often accompany phenomenon that happen not only physically, but it's spiritually as well. It becomes like a ghost or seeing a dead relative, which we know is not truly a dead relative. And how can this be overcome? Well, John D'Souza, who was also a former FBI agent, legitimate source, is saying something pretty incredible. And he tells you exactly how these things can be overcome. Check this out.
So why do you think it stopped? What stopped it, in your opinion?
Well, in the many years since that time, having spoken to other witnesses who had very similar situations, sometimes identical, almost identical situations, what I found out was, as anyone who studies this area knows, is that these abductions are very often stopped with only one thing. It is by claiming the blood and authority of Jesus Christ.
There you go.
That's the only thing I have ever heard that stops these abduction experiences from going forward. They get stopped dead in their tracks. And we've seen it. We've seen it over and over again.
Over and over again. And I think Joe Jordan has a book on this, and it's incredible. And so many stories. I'm going to start reading some of the stories that people have sent into him that are in the book here pretty soon for the channel. But it's obvious to me this is a much bigger deception than even people in the news know, even in what's going on right now. And if you think this is an important issue that we need to bring out, if you think spiritualism in the last days is something that we need to ring the bell on and say, hey, this is something that everyone needs to know about so you're not deceived, like, share this program, but also contribute to our Patreon, because we can't do this without you. We are doing this for presenting this material, and we have to get other jobs. So we can't be full-time doing this unless you contribute and help us out doing this. Patreon.com/Strange Normal. We are a 501(c)(3) here in the next couple months, so we appreciate 501(c)(3), whatever it is, nonprofit. So if you feel that God is pushing you to contribute to this, by all means, please help us out. We love you guys, and we look forward to the day when we are all again together. God bless you.